And it's quite a hard thing to explain. I mean, people feel it, but it's quite technical, to explain what inflation actually does. But we all feel it. We all know it. And as long as that is going on, I think that some cynical politicians and others effectively say, let them eat identity politics. I mean, at times like that, if you can't do the things which really are necessary to give your life meaning and to give your life a drive and a purpose and the knowledge that things are going to be better for you next year than they are today, if you don't have that, maybe, you can be persuaded that no one will be free until, everyone who wants to have their dick cut off gets it cut off, which seems to me to be ridiculous.
Right. It's just a distraction.
It's a horrible distraction. Am I allowed to say what I just said?
Yes, you can just say it's real talk, right?
Okay. But to me, it's preposterous that we should sort of say, let's just make sure that no trans child isn't supported. What? What are you talking about? There was not even a phrase for trans child till about 10 years ago. Now you want to spend all your time obsessing about this and doubling down on this? I think it's because these things that are much, much more important are not being addressed by our government or by our economy. And I think that there are so many follow-on problems from that. I said in The Madness of Crowds, it's not obvious to me that a young person who cannot accrue capital will automatically become a capitalist. In fact, it's very likely they will be seduced by other ideas. Why in the post-2008 period did so many people start to say things like, was Marx right? No, he still wasn't right.
Douglas Murray detonates a truth bomb about our civilization's deadliest delusion. While China buys Africa and Iran runs 7 proxy wars, Western elites obsess over pronouns and microaggressions. From crumbling cities to parallel societies, he exposes how the American dream became a woke nightmare. But there's a twist. As Europe's high-trust society unravels, America's DNA of freedom might be civilization's last hope. Ready for uncomfortable truths that'll shatter your worldview? Brace yourself. This isn't just analysis. It's a wake-up call for Western survival.
So much of the criticism against Bibi Netanyahu's speech, Prime Minister of Israel's speech in the United States, was that he had come to the U.S. to push us into World War III, to push us into a war that we should not be in, because this is what Israel would want. So you went to the speech, and I know you've been studying this issue for a while. What is your response to that?
I suppose some people think that. I've seen some commenters say, it's nonsense. What he's trying to do is to rally an international coalition against the country that is destabilizing the Middle East, which is Iran, or the regime in Iran. It is Iran that has been funding and arming Hamas. It is Iran that has been funding, arming, and training Hezbollah that has destabilized Lebanon. It is Iran that has been funding, arming, and training the Houthi in Yemen, which is attacking international shipping lanes, has shot at and hit British naval vessels, among others. Wherever you look in the Middle East, it's Iran that has been destabilizing everything. Now, it doesn't seem to me that Israel should have to keep open all the world's water lanes, among other tasks. But Israel is fighting a war very hot in some places, slightly cooler in others, on 7 fronts at the moment. And I don't think that is fair. I don't think that Israel should have to do that or do it alone. Of course, the Biden administration has been on and off pretty good with helping to rearm Israel in this conflict. But it seems to me that America should be encouraged, along with other Western powers, to make it very clear to Iran that its regional destabilization should not be allowed to continue. Will America do that? We'll see. But that was what Netanyahu was calling for. And there was plenty of criticism of him within Israel for doing that as well. But that is what he has always seen as the principal issue in the region as well. And with one other thing, which is that the principal concern he has always had, and which I've always had, long had, is to ensure that Iran, the Iranian Revolutionary Islamic government, never gets nuclear weapons.
Is it fair to expect the United States, which is on the other side of the world, to get involved in wars in the Middle East?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think a lot of people, particularly on the right, have been reevaluating that. A lot of people on the left have long thought that we shouldn't, or that we should come in on another side.
Right. I mean, it almost feels like things have, I don't know if they flip-flopped or I don't know what, but I agree with you. I'm hearing from many on the right, they call it America first maybe, or an isolationist mentality.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely grown on the right. And to be fair to them, it has grown for some completely understandable reasons. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq in particular did not go well. And after 20 years in Afghanistan, America has very little to show for it. Not nothing, by the way.
When Iran's funding 7 proxy wars simultaneously, Hamas $100 million per year, Hezbollah $700 million per year, Houthis in Yemen attacking global shipping, and 4 other fronts, it's hardly warmongering for Netanyahu to suggest containing them. While critics scream World War III, they conveniently ignore Iran's ongoing destabilization campaign across the Middle East. Israel's fighting on 7 fronts while protecting international shipping lanes. Maybe the question isn't why Netanyahu wants support, but why the West lets Iran run amok.
Not nothing. The aim was to stop another 9/11 happening, and that worked. And that's a lot. That's a lot. To be able to make sure that there were not Al-Qaeda camps in which people are planning to fly planes into major American cities. It's always hard to get any credit for the things that didn't happen. But America does, and brave men and women of the American Armed Forces do deserve an enormous amount of credit for that. But nevertheless, Afghanistan, as people will have noticed, is not a thriving democratic society and is handed back into the hands of the Taliban.
Yeah, we certainly left in a bad way.
Left in a terrible way. And so when people see that, I understand why a lot of people on the right and the left say, we just don't seem to be very good at this, so let's not do more of it. But I would say that those people who do take the view that therefore America should step back from the world should consider 2 things. Firstly, that, for instance, in the case of Israel, and also, by the way, in the case of Ukraine, people are not asking for American boots on the ground. In both cases, they're asking for American support to allow them to fight the war that they're having to fight. In the case of Ukraine against Vladimir Putin's aggression, in the case of Israel against Iranian aggression. And that is a very different thing. Nobody, as far as I know, nobody high up or in a position of influence in Israel or in America is saying we should have GIs in the Middle East. Quite other than that. The Israelis are capable, have shown themselves very capable of fighting to defend their country and their families and their people. And they're asking for American support in the form of armaments, diplomatic support, deterrence effects like planes being sent to the region to patrol and to just show as a sign of strength. A very good thing, I think, that early in the conflict, President Biden sent a aircraft carrier to the region. But they're asking for that. That's a very different thing. But the second thing I would say, and do say to the sort of America first, because of course, by the way, the America first thing is, of course, America should be first for Americans.
But is it also America only?
Right. Now, and the thing I say to those people is, there is a massive contradiction they have in their thinking, which they should at some point address. The America-only people that I have spoken to and know don't want America in the 21st century to be an obscure power.
Let's get something straight. Afghanistan wasn't a total failure. No more Al-Qaeda camps plotting another 9/11 is actually a big win. Now, Israel and Ukraine aren't asking for American troops. They're requesting weapons and diplomatic backing to fight their own battles. There's a massive difference between sending an aircraft carrier as deterrence versus launching another 20-year ground war. The choice isn't between world police and total isolation. It's about smart power projection that serves American interests.
They don't want China, the Chinese Communist Party, to be the premier country in the world. In fact, if you say that to them, they're horrified by the idea. So I would say that the thing they have to address is, you do still want to be the premier power in the world, don't you? Yes. But you think you can do it by withdrawing from the world entirely? You think that's possible? You think that if America is not interested in the world, other countries are not? I mean, America isn't very interested in Africa, but the Chinese Communist Party is really interested in Africa and is doing very clever things, not just in Belt and Road, but buying up of mineral resources and much more. So, again, with the Middle East, with the Near East, if America is not interested, at least, I'm afraid there are other countries that are. And I think that the America-only people should really make up their minds on this. America can either be a secondary or tertiary world power, or it can be the premier world power. And if it's premier world power, it should keep an interest in the world. That is not to say it should intervene everywhere. Far from it. It does not mean that it should be the sole policeman in the world, because this is a horrible and onerous job, and it is preposterous that, for instance, America should be, holding too much, carrying too much of the water for global security. Of course, NATO allies need to step up, have to step up, and some have. But that needs American leadership in the world. It does not mean that America should be the fool in this. Of course not. But it cannot just step back. That's a delusion. It's a dream. It's one that throughout American history has tempted people.
Yeah.
But it's a temptation, like a lot of temptations, that should be resisted.
Can I share with you some of the criticism that people who are watching right now might have about what you said? The things I hear them say is that America is funding both sides of the war. There is a military-industrial complex that is profiting from World War, where they essentially encourage war. The U.S. encourages war, encourages a war in Israel so that Israel will then go and buy more armament. Just curious about what is your response to the criticism of this, I guess, military-industrial war complex?
You do hear this. By the way, this used to be an argument made only on the political left.
Yes.
And it has now been picked up by parts of the right.
Let's puncture this war profiteering myth with some inconvenient facts. Yes, defense contractors make money, but Israel spends 75% of US military aid buying American equipment, which sustains American jobs and manufacturing capacity. The alternative? Let China and Russia arm our allies and enemies alike. Iran's already spending billions on Chinese weapons while building nuclear facilities with Russian help. You can't complain about the military-industrial complex Monday through Friday, then wonder why China's outproducing us in advanced weapons on Saturday.
It used to be a sort of Chomskyite argument on the left that, the reason why the world was unstable was principally because of the military-industrial complex and people who wanted to get rich from war.
Yes.
I mean, look, some people can get rich from war, I suppose, but the idea that it's the principal purpose of war is, I think, so deeply cynical as well as sort of provably untrue. And by the way, in our societies, in America and elsewhere, there are places where we put respect. People often think there aren't areas of our societies where respect is given, but actually there are. Like, people respect nurses, people respect doctors. People used to respect medical health professionals, so it's taken a bit of a hit, and so on. But it's not like our societies respect enormously arms companies. It's not it's not one of the main. Arms production is a sad necessity, but every country has an arms industry of some kind, because private industry often gets outsourced by governments to produce basic things like shells and munitions. But the idea that anyone, let alone this sort of shadowy cabal, is engineering conflict for that purpose is not just something I think has never been proven. I just think it's a deeply cynical attitude towards things, and also just a very simplistic omni-explanation for a lot of complex realities. I don't think the Ayatollahs in Iran are being led by the nose by the military-industrial complex in America.
Really? We can't blame the West for that too?
Well, that again, it falls to that temptation to think it must be something we're doing, must be something in our society.
It's an amazing thing when you put it that way, because on the one hand, we think that so many elements of our government are so incompetent, right? It's like the bigger the government, the smaller the citizen. They're just, anything you give to them, they break, right? The simplest example is just shipping, like, UPS, which is private, versus government operated mail.
Yeah.
Terrible, right? And you can take larger examples, the education system, et cetera. And so on the one hand, they're so incompetent. On the other hand, they are so competent that they can create this entire narrative that will suck the entire world into different wars, and in order to enrich themselves. It's like, which one is it?
Well, this is another I think, expression of what I describe as that second dark age problem, which is there's so much going on, so much information coming at us, that the unifying explanation is especially attractive. And I think that's why our era has slipped into conspiracy theory on the right and the left. By the way, also I should say with conspiracy theory,
here's the hilarious contradiction. The same folks who think the government can't deliver mail efficiently somehow believe it's masterfully orchestrating global conflicts through a shadowy cabal. It's Schrodinger's government, simultaneously too incompetent to fix potholes, but clever enough to manipulate worldwide geopolitics for profit. Reality check: Iran's Ayatollahs aren't taking orders from Lockheed Martin, and Hamas didn't attack Israel because Raytheon needed a Q4 boost. Sometimes a war is just a war.
One of the annoying things about this is that some conspiracies turn out to be true, or things are described as conspiracy theories that are happening. A lot of Western governments describe the idea that mass migration is occurring and is destabilizing our societies. They describe that as a conspiracy theory. No, that's just happening. Are there conspiracy theories that come from that? Oh, you bet. But they're in part exacerbated by governments pretending that what is happening in front of our eyes is not happening. But I do think that in this era of enormous complexity, and just, as I say, the main thing is just this stuff washing over us all the time, I think that looking for overarching explanations, trying to work out a figure in the haze, is very attractive, because it's something you can hold on to.
Well, it's what people have always done. They kind of want to put their finger on something or point their finger at someone in order to blame them for horrific things that happen, including greed and murder and crime and all of that. I mean, as a child of a Jewish family, I learned about these conspiracy theories, and when I hear about them, I feel like they always somehow land with Jew hatred, right?
Yeah,
so
for sure.
You look at the conspiracy theories in Russia, right, where they were blaming the Jews, right? Yeah. Tsarist Russia, where they were blaming the Jews for the bubonic plague. Well, why weren't the Jews dying from the bubonic plague at the same rates as the rest of the Russians? And they didn't look at it as, well, the Jews had washing rituals and they were kind of more insular and they had their own wells, and so things were clean. And so it wasn't that the Jews were infecting the rest of the Russians with the disease in order to kill them, but the Jews were blamed for that. And then you take that into Nazi Germany, right? Where, Germany suffered tremendously with economic defeat as well as, the defeat after the war. Well, who did they blame? They blamed the Jews. They had to point their finger, and it started with conspiracy theories. There must be somebody behind this economic situation that everybody is suffering with.
Yes.
And so it is so hard for me to not have a visceral response to conspiracy theories, because conspiracy theories seem to always blame the Jews.
Yes, yeah. Well, the Jews are pretty much perfect as a receiver of these conspiracies. I mean, it's sort of perfect because it's a distinctly small minority of the global population which tends to outperform wherever it is. Now, that's not always been the case, but it's very often been the case historically, and for reasons including some ones you gave. I mean, Jewish participation in banking, for instance. So people, could see something.
Conspiracy theories are history's lazy shortcuts. During the Black Death, Jews had lower mortality rates thanks to ritual washing and better sanitation. But instead of learning from this, others chose persecution. Fast forward to today, when complex global issues arise, the same pattern emerges. The military-industrial complex narrative isn't new. It's just anti-Semitism, wearing modern clothes. Throughout history, successful minorities become convenient scapegoats for those seeking simple answers to complex problems.
Sinister in that, but I mean, it was only for the same reasons that Scots, I can say this as half Scot, were very prominent in banking, and it was to do with trust between communities of trust. The Scots had a particular way of doing it, lending money in the knowledge that you would be able to get it back. Same thing within Jewish communities. It had much more to do with trust than any issue of conspiracy, and of course, lending laws in Europe in past centuries. But yes, the Jews are, because they're a minority, are very, very just terribly, horribly vulnerable to these sorts of claims. And, I believe it's a sort of, in part, also a psychological problem. The late Martin Amis said that he had once spoken to a psychiatrist who claimed he could predict with considerable certainty when one of his patients was about to turn anti-Semitic. Yeah, and it came somewhere after paranoia started to kick in. Mm-hmm. It makes total sense. I've seen it a few times myself. And I think that generally once you get into paranoid thinking, and again, I'm not dissing all paranoid thinking, because sometimes you're right when you're paranoid. But there is a level of it which you start to want to find people to blame. And the Jews are just very available for that. But in general, this is a sort of low resolution way to look at really complex problems.
Do you think there is an inoculation against that kind of mind virus of?
Yeah, I think there is to an extent, but you'll never be able to eradicate it.
Sure.
I mean, one of the ways I say that you've made it clear that you don't know anything about anti-Semitism is if you say that we must eradicate it.
Not possible.
Not possible. You can dampen it down. You can try to lead people away from it, but it's so just available as a mind virus. But there are lots of mind viruses going around at the moment, and I think, as I say, they happen on the right, they happen on the left, and they need to be countered. Is that uphill work? You bet. But it's not hopeless.
Mm-hmm. One of your favorite quotes, which you haven't had a chance to say yet, but I absolutely love, is that America is getting fat and lazy and China is getting hungrier than ever. Mm-hmm. It probably got you into trouble, but it is true. And we have to think about that seriously. What are your thoughts about China right now if America continues to project this weakness?
A lot of political economists, you might say it's inevitable because they're political economists, but we'll say there's one primary role of government, which is to make sure the economy does not go wrong. And I actually, although I think it's sort of to some extent exaggerated, it's not a complete exaggeration, because if the economy goes wrong, everything else goes wrong. And actually in recent years, particularly people coming up, the economy is not working for a lot of people in our countries. It's not impossible, but it is hard in an era of inflation to accumulate capital.
While America debates pronouns, China's building ports across Africa and buying rare earth minerals. Here's the brutal truth. When a Big Mac costs more than an hour's wage and young Americans can't afford homes, America first means fixing our economic fundamentals. China's not winning because they're smarter, they're winning because they're hungry while we're distracted. You can't maintain superpower status when your middle class is shrinking and basic necessities are becoming luxuries.
It is hard in the post-2008 period of quantitative easing to be able to get enough of a deposit together to put down money for a home. It was never easy to live in major cities. It was never cheap, but it wasn't always this hard. And it's hard for young people at the moment. It's hard for some older people as well. But that thing of getting on property ladder, things like that, that is something that is so important for governments to be able to fix. I think that because governments, broadly speaking, have failed since 2008, and the economy is not working for so many people, and we have the cost of living crisis, and everyone knows your grocery bill is just like, how did that happen?
Overwhelming.
It's just unbelievable. And it's quite a hard thing to explain. I mean, people feel it, but it's quite technical, to explain what inflation actually does. But we all feel it. We all know it. And as long as that is going on, I think that some cynical politicians and others effectively say, let them eat identity politics. I mean, at times like that, if you can't do the things which really are necessary to give your life meaning and to give your life a drive and a purpose and the knowledge that things are going to be better for you next year than they are today, if you don't have that, maybe, you can be persuaded that no one will be free until, everyone who wants to have their dick cut off gets it cut off, which seems to me to be ridiculous.
Right. It's just a distraction.
It's a horrible distraction. Am I allowed to say what I just said?
Yes, you can just say it's real talk, right?
Okay. But I mean, to me, it's preposterous that we should sort of say, let's just make sure that no trans child isn't supported. What? What are you talking about? There was not even a phrase for trans child till about 10 years ago. Now you want to spend all your time obsessing about this and doubling down on this? I think it's because these things that are much, much more important are not being addressed by our government or by our economy. And I think that there are so many follow-on problems from that. I said in The Madness of Crowds, it's not obvious to me that a young person who cannot accrue capital will automatically become a capitalist. In fact, it's very likely they will be seduced by other ideas. Why in the post-2008 period did so many people start to say things like, was Marx right? No, he still wasn't right.
When a 30-year-old can't afford a home their parents bought at 25, we get lectures about pronouns instead of solutions. Post-2008, while grocery bills explode and housing becomes a luxury, politicians offer identity politics as cheap substitute for economic opportunity. No wonder young people question capitalism, not because Marx was right, but because the system's failing them. You can't eat social justice and you can't live in a diversity statement.
But it's almost as if, there's capitalism and then Marxism. And if capitalism isn't working, maybe we should look at Marxism again. Completely insane way of looking at things. Marxism still doesn't work, cannot work, never worked anywhere. Never got any society out of poverty, relative or otherwise. Capitalism can work, is the only mechanism we've ever come up with as a society to improve the lot of society. I mean, if you look at the charts of, human, wealth accumulation, now we were just deadlining for millennia. People did, a king in the 16th century in Europe had no way to grow the pie other than trying to squeeze people for more taxes who had no money and were living in what we would now regard as destitution, or invading a country and taking their money. But until capitalism, we had no idea of how to grow the pie. And now we do have an idea. Does it work all the time? No. Could it work better? Definitely. Is the answer, when it's not working optimally, Marxism? No, obviously not. But that's when people can be seduced by bad ideas and go back and look at bad ideas in the past and wonder, maybe we can try that again.
If you're spending your entire day trying to make ends meet, you don't have time to even think about growth or freedom or bigger issues, right?
No.
It's just, you'll just get distracted.
But by the way, I should also stress that there is a something in this which does also have to be said, and the sort of boomer criticism does forget the fact that although our parents, I think, say, did live in an era where, you could get a mortgage that was 3 times your salary, and, and so on. And now, because of the rocketing of house prices and so on, so you need like 10 times your salary. And so there are things like that. But still, it was not easy for our parents' generation. And I think that one of the things which it's very hard for politicians to say, particularly in America, is there are some things in the system, the economic system, that are not working as well as we would like them to work, and that the cost of living crisis and your grocery bill are some of them. But don't sit back and think it's going to be solved for you. Like, don't do that. You should work your what off. And if you do, you can be rewarded for it. And I think of all the families in America where a mom or a father, holds down a couple of jobs, and it's still not easy, but they're not behaving as if they're owed everything.
Let's get real. Before capitalism, even kings couldn't grow wealth. They just squeezed peasants harder or invaded neighbors. Yes, today's system has serious flaws. When a mortgage needs 10 times your salary versus your parents' 3 times, something's broken. But the answer isn't Marx's failed theories. The truth nobody wants to hear. The system needs fixing, and you need to work your tail off. Those holding multiple jobs to make ends meet understand this better than any ivory tower socialist.
And I do think that one of the remarkable things that has driven the American economy always is simply the American public and the American worker. It is so important that they feel that they have a stake in it and that they can get better, and that their lives next year will be better than this year, and their lives 10 years from now will be better than it is now. And that, the guy driving that car, maybe I can drive that car one day. And that's a brilliant thing that inspires and fuels the American economy. But we should not bring up a fatalistic generation who are like, capitalism isn't working for me, so, I'll wait till something does. No. You have to go and make your own luck on some of that.
Final question. You wrote a book about the strange death of Europe. You're now here in the United States watching the woke mind virus wash through the entire country. Are you more optimistic about the U.S. than Europe? Do you think that we have a similar fate?
I think Europe and Britain are in a real, there's a real spiral they could be in at the moment. And it's happening in Britain at the moment where, unfettered immigration, mass immigration, illegal migration, and legal migration have been at historic highs. And societies that were high trust societies have become very low trust societies. And societies that were very coherent, including in my own life, have become or are becoming really wildly incoherent societies, where there's very little, increasingly little, that's binding them together. And I'd say it's the same in France and across continental Europe. It's very, very worrying and very dangerous. And we have seen recently with things like the atrocity of this terrible young man who went and stabbed these young girls who were the Taylor Swift dance class.
The little girls.
Just beyond belief. And the public mood is febrile. And there have been demonstrations and even things that, we do not see often in Britain, burning of police stations by very angry mobs. And then I just see today, a Muslim group, sort of doing a boundary policing thing in their area of chanting Allahu Akbar and defend the mosque sort of thing. The way in which things can go wrong, and it's exactly what's, tell you, the worst thing for me is it's exactly what I said would happen. And the reason I wrote The Strange Death of Europe, and the reason I banged on about this for years beforehand, was I said it is so obvious what is going to happen.
Yeah.
And it gives me, I was so angry watching it when it could have been stopped.
Yeah, it sucks to be right about something so bad.
Britain and Europe are watching their high-trust societies unravel in real time. When communities that shared centuries of common culture splinter into parallel societies, you can't put that genie back in the bottle. We're seeing the consequences play out, from police station burnings to neighborhood patrols chanting religious slogans. The worst part? This was predictable and preventable. It's like watching a slow-motion car crash you warned everyone about years ago, only to be dismissed as alarmist.
So bad.
I wanted to be wrong. However, there is a deep, deep distrust among the political class in the UK about the British public. They really don't seem to like them. They really don't seem to like them. They're so eager to attack the general public and cover over for anything else. And I think it's just a lamentable and suicidal policy. And I think it's one that happens across Europe. The saving grace in America, and I don't see that still can't be turned around. It could be with the right leadership. The saving grace in America is some kind of belief in the goodness of the American people. And that's taken a beating. My goodness, the education system has done everything it can to bash the innate goodness out of the American people. But I believe that the optimism, the belief in the family, the belief in the family unit, and therefore all of those communities that follow out from it, I still think there's a sort of goodness about that, a faith in that, a hope in that, that when you extrapolate it out to the widest form of that, the nation, the public, still has a certain belief about it, and that you can still ignite that American optimism. Despite all of the efforts that have been made, it's not been completely beaten out of the American public. And I think there is a feeling that despite, the things happening from right and left and all of the fears and confusion we're all living through, I do still think there is this thing that America is good and has been a force for good in the world and can be again. And that hope, what we call the American dream, is not dead, has not been beaten out of people completely, and still should give us hope and give us the possibility that the 21st century will not be this dark age, but could be one in which America and its allies, hopefully, could show a positive vision of what to do in the world. If that happens, the future really is ours. If it doesn't happen, the future belongs to goodness knows who. And if people, as I always say, if people think the era of American dominance was awful and, oppressive, you wouldn't like any of the rivals.
Well, boy, am I glad that at least you ended this with something positive, because I do believe that Americans have it in our DNA to want freedom and self-reliance. It's kind of what we're made of over here. And as much as our education system, which is number 34 in the world, is failing, or maybe it's succeeding in what it's set to do, sadly. I think many of us know that, and we're seeing it, and we're ready to fight for it. And it's no surprise that fighters like you come to the United States to, spread this message to the rest of the world.
Here's the crucial difference. While European elites view their own people with suspicion, America still believes in its people's fundamental goodness. Despite universities preaching self-hatred and an education system ranked 34th globally, Americans maintain their DNA of freedom and self-reliance. The American dream isn't just about material success. It's about believing tomorrow can be better than today. That optimism, that faith in ordinary people's capacity for greatness, is America's secret weapon against decline. Douglas Murray examines civilization's mounting challenges, from economic inequality to geopolitical tensions. While Europe struggles with fragmenting societies, America's foundational optimism offers hope despite serious challenges. So, any thoughts on what Douglas just discussed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you never miss any of Douglas's debates.